So, good evening, everybody. My name is Carolyn Martin. I'm with the New Brunswick Adoption Foundation, and you're here for our exciting webinar this evening, the first part of a two-part series. Tonight is called The Eye of the Storm, preventing, responding, and recovering from crises in the family. So this is again part one. The next webinars for part of the series will be on May 28th at 8 p.m. as well. So before we get started this evening, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that we, the New Brunswick Adoption Foundation, are a provincial entity. We acknowledge that we carry out our work on the traditional unceded territory of the Wolastoqiyik, Mi'kmaq, and Pesco-Tumakati peoples. This territory is covered by the treaties of peace and friendship, which these nations first signed with the British Crown in 1726. The treaties did not deal with the surrender of lands and resources, but in fact recognized Mi'kmaq and Wolastoqiyik titles and established the rules for what was to be an ongoing relationship between nations. We, the staff and members of the board, pay respect to the elders, past and present, and descendants of this land. We honor the knowledge keepers and seek their guidance as we strive to develop closer relationships with the Indigenous peoples in New Brunswick. As an organization focused on vulnerable children in the care system, we express these words with both humility and hope. So I want to give a little description of tonight's webinar. I will be your host. We are very, very excited to have Sue Badeau joining us here tonight. When a child has a history of trauma or complex neurobiological challenges, behavioral outbursts can feel like less of a tantrum and more like a natural disaster. That is absolutely accurate. The Eye of the Storm Part 1 provides parents and professionals with a weather map for these high stress moments. Before we dive into our discussion, I just want to take one moment to remind everyone about our network and upcoming programming. The New Brunswick Adoption Foundation is a nonprofit organization that aims to promote and advocate for children in the permanent care of our province. Our vision is that every child and youth in the permanent care of the province finds a permanent family. So we do have some upcoming events on our calendar. So May 20th at 8 o'clock, we have our support group for parents and caregivers of teens and tweens within the adoption, foster care, and kinship care called Riding the Wave. This is a bilingual group. May 21st at 8 p.m., we have our next late night talks, which is in English, and that's for adoptive, pre-adoptive, foster, kinship, parents, and caregivers, as well as adults impacted by the adoption and care system. May 26th at 8 p.m., we have our next group for pre-adoptive, and those are who are considering adoption or fostering, called While You're Waiting. And May 27th at 8 p.m., we have our French language group called Plus Fort Ensemble, who are for French-speaking families at any stage of the journey. Couple of housekeeping items before we get started as well. To get the most out of the presentation, I encourage everyone to switch to speaker view so you can focus on the presenter once we get started. We love engagement, so please do use your chat feature throughout the presentation to ask your questions and state your comments. Our presenter will be kind of checking the chat throughout the presentation. We'll pause at moments that are important and meaningful to her, but definitely keep your questions coming and they will be answered. You can find the chat by pushing those three little dots at the bottom of your screen. We are recording this evening, so the webinar will be available after in a public way. So just be mindful when you're asking questions, if you're speaking things out loud, people's names and things like that would be available publicly after. However, we will be turning off the recording at the end of the webinar for a Q&A portion. So if you have questions that are a little more personal, we can have those at the end. At the end of the webinar, we'll also have a brief survey for you to complete. We'd really appreciate it if you could take a moment to answer the 5 questions. Your feedback is really valuable to supporting our ongoing work. Okay, without further ado, I'll share a little bit of an introduction of Sue Badeau. Sue trains, consults, and speaks nationally and internationally on trauma and resilience, racial justice, family engagement, self-care, and and serves on the boards of the Association for Training and Treatment of Trauma in Children and Emera International. And Sue and her husband Hector are lifetime parents of 22 children, two by birth, 20 that are adopted, and have also been foster parents to 75 and hosted refugees from Kosovo and Sudan. They've also co-authored several books, including a book with their daughter as well. So that's we're just so excited to have you here this evening. I will pass things over to you to get started whenever you're ready, Sue.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much. It's really a delight to be here. I don't know if you can recognize by my name, my last name, Badeau, that my husband's family is from Canada. So I feel a special affinity when I get to be part of presenting or sharing or mingling with my people in Canada. So thank you for welcoming me in. And yeah, I had specifically asked Carolyn, keep the bio short. I don't need a long introduction, but you will hear some stories and things about my life woven into the context of the training. So I want to reiterate, before I pull up the slides and kind of officially get us started, I just want to definitely reiterate what Carolyn said. I love it if we can be interactive. So during the part, the core, let's say, of the presentation, that will mainly be through the chat box, and I will keep an eye on it. So I also will be times when I'll ask you specifically, please jot this in the chat, or drop a note about that in the chat. But you can also take your own initiative to put questions or comments in there as well. There will also be some poll questions, a handful of times, not lots of them, but a few times throughout the evening, just as another way of engagement. And then at the end, when we take off the recording, you'll be able to unmute yourself and talk that way, as well as continuing to use the chat if you like. So without further ado, I think it's time we can pull up the slides and get things started. So yes, we are talking about the eye of the storm and all the elements of sort of preventing and responding to and recovering from family crisis. And tonight we're going to really focus on the typical kinds of crises that we have, right? We have all kinds of different crises or mini crises, major crises, macro, micro, all those kinds of things. And they don't always escalate, especially when we have some degree of this kind of knowledge about trauma and how it affects behavior and some of the tools in our toolkit of what we can do with that. And then the next time when we get together in a couple of weeks, we'll kind of be going into those more intensive ones when there is the escalation. And we'll be talking about escalating, not escalating, trying to not escalate, and de-escalating is the word I was looking for. So that's kind of how the two sessions are connected. So tonight we're going to, kind of review the idea about behavior being language, and how we prevent things from getting too far into that circular storm happening by recognizing signs and noticing what's happening in the body, the children's body and our own. Things we can do to nurture the secure type of attachment that also helps prevent those chaotic storms. And then how we can not only settle our bodies, but regulate affect and emotions, again, theirs and ours. We'll talk a little bit about, okay, but what we've done those things and we're still getting some kind of storm stuff happening. What do we do? So I'll mention a little bit about de-escalation, but like I said, that's the whole theme of next time. But we will talk about a little bit tonight about what to do kind of during some of those interactions and afterwards, because after the storm is probably your best sweet spot of time when you can really make those connections that lead to deeper trust, deeper and more secure attachment, deeper feelings of safety. If you manage them effectively. And if you're not already so exhausted from getting through the storm, as I know I often am, that you're just like, phew, it's over. Like everybody just go retreat. But before we go retreat, we want to really make the most of those moments. So that's what I'll be focusing on in our time together this evening. And so to kind of keep us focused, I have some basic learning objectives that I hope you will pick up from as we go along, that I want you to think about. And I know you've probably already, some of you, I didn't take a poll about how long you've been doing what you're doing with fostering and adopting and caring, being a caregiver for children, being a carer, but I'm sure you do recognize and understand a lot. You've learned a lot about trauma. You've learned certainly about your children that are in your home. But if we can just even use some of this time together this evening to reflect on that, to just pause a little bit and say, remind myself, what are those underlying causes that drive some of this crisis-like behavior that we tend to get in our household or in our relationships? And not just be kind of in that hyper like reactive mode, but just being able to take a few minutes to step back and pause and think about that. The second, I'm going to name and identify several, more than three, trauma specific strategies that you can use. So I hope that by hearing those various strategies, that maybe three of them at least will sound like this might be something I could try, or even maybe something you have tried before but not recently. And oh yeah, I remember I used to do that and it was pretty handy. Let's see if I can try it again. So it doesn't have to be something new. I often like to say, in fact, when I'm either offering a training or when I'm receiving, when I'm sitting and listening to someone else train, people often, especially I think it's kind of a function of our current culture kind of in a large, broad, global kind of way, where, we have 24-hour news cycles, we have instant technology, we have all of these things. And so we're always looking for what's the next new thing. And sometimes we approach training that way, like I have to get something new out of it. And if I don't get something new, then it wasn't really worth my time. It's fun, exciting, and meaningful and valuable to get something new. But sometimes, even if what we're hearing we've heard before, we know it, we've known it for a while, there's still value in participating again. And so I always ask myself a couple of questions when I'm in training where maybe they're talking about things that I feel like, oh yeah, I already know that. If you start to kind of have that thought, oh, I've heard this, I know that, I've done this, that's great. That's a time to think of three questions. One is, if I know this, do I do it? Sometimes there's that gap between knowing and doing, right? So if I'm being reminded of something I already know, is it because I need a little more focus on the doing of it? So that's one question to ask in those kind of situations. The second is, okay, I know this and maybe I'm already doing it as well. Is there someone I could share it with? And in the sharing of it, we could make a connection, me and this other person, my partner, my spouse, my best friend, another parent who's newer into the process. Sometimes by sharing, we get better at things. So if I know it and I'm doing it, can I share it? And then the third one is, okay, yeah, this is stuff I know, but does it hit me differently today than the first time or the last time that I heard it? Because circumstances change, the children we care for change, our life change, we age. And so sometimes something that we knew kind of hits us in a different way and we have to rethink it or unpack it a little differently. So I bring that up when I talk specifically about learning objectives and learning specific strategies, because it's not always about getting something new. It's sometimes about how we really respond to and kind of engage with material, whether we've heard it before or not. And then the last learning objective that I bring to the table tonight is that you can be thinking about what are some of the ways I can plan ahead and be ready when there is some kind of, crisis situation occurring, or before it occurs, that I can be ready for it and kind of have some tools to respond before and during and after by having been thoughtful and having planned ahead. So those are the objectives. I'll pause here for a second. Is there anything that I said so far that doesn't correspond with what you thought you signed up for, or any question about the objectives or the kind of the plan, the outline of the content we're going to cover? I don't see anything in the chat, but just thought I would give you a moment. Okay, then we're going to go ahead and jump in, and we're going to start with preventing. But before we do that, we're going to even kind of back it up to a very fundamental, foundational point. And for that, I want to get you engaged by doing the first poll. So if we could have that poll number 1, please. All right, and when the polls come up, hopefully you can see them on your device. And I always read them out loud too, just in case anyone can't see it on their device. So I encourage you to answer it in the poll, but if for some reason you're not able to do that, you can also write an answer in the chat. But this one says, the phrase, all behavior is a language, refers to out of control behavior can be corrected by teaching children language skills. Second one, behavior expresses a specific need. Third one, behavior is like a foreign language. You have to study it to become fluent. And the last one, behaviors are chosen deliberately, just like words are chosen deliberately. Okay. So what I see, what first strikes me is that every single answer got at least someone choosing it as an answer. And I did frame this one as a single choice. I didn't say choose all the answers that apply, but I could have, because in this instance, there's not so much a right and wrong as there's a more of what I intended and less of what I intended. So the one that did get the most of your votes, behavior expresses a specific need, is following the path we're kind of going to be following tonight. Behavior is a way of expression. That's why we call it language. It is an expression. And sometimes it's an expression that a child really truly doesn't have either the cognition or the words for. So the first answer isn't completely wrong, because you know what? The more children learn language skills and words to put with feelings and words to put with circumstances, it actually can help with behavior. So, you know, that top question, that top answer isn't a wrong one. It's sort of built into the premise that we're going with here. And same thing would be true again for that third one, which says behavior is like a foreign language. You have to study it to become fluent. And you know, that's really true with our kiddos. And the more you have, and if you have children that join your family, some at birth, some at older ages, coming from different backgrounds, maybe different prior history, different culture, then each one brings their own, quote, foreign language into your household. And you have to really learn how to be fluent in each child's language. So that's not a wrong answer either. Behaviors being deliberately chosen, the final one, I wouldn't say it's wrong. It's less frequent. There are some children who can intentionally choose a behavior that they know is going to get a certain type of reaction, and they're choosing it with that intent in mind, and they're being fairly deliberate about it. That's less frequent than people tend to think. People tend to think kind of all behavior is something that's intentional. And, you know, I don't know if any of you ever read or watch videos by Brené Brown, but she has a video about having gratitude. She talks about the importance of gratitude and compassion. And in it, she says, you know, but she talks about before she kind of came to this understanding, she said, I used to think people were just jerks intentionally to piss me off. Her words. But sometimes we kind of get that feeling, like even about our kids, like they're just intentionally trying to pull my chain and you know, make me angry or stir things up. And of course, all of us as parents know sometimes that happens, but it's less frequent. And especially with our kiddos with their trauma histories and disrupted attachment patterns and, you know, early life what some people sometimes have described primal wounds, all of the things that go into shaping who they are before they even come to our family, means that this last one here, while it can happen, is very less frequent than we might think. So anyway, all the answers had some room there. They all come into play, but the one that you did pick the most is the one they're kind of focusing on now. Behavior expresses a need. We can take down the sharing. And now, so with behavior being a language, then we want to spend some of our time, if we're going to really be preventing crises, then we need to learn, what is this language telling us? I have a picture here of puzzle pieces to accompany the slide about behavior being language and sort of how it relates to meltdowns and trauma. As you look at that picture of puzzle pieces, if we were in person, if we were doing a training in person, I would have you sitting at tables and I would give each table a puzzle that kind of looked like this. You dump it out on your table, and I would give you the task of working with the people around the table with you to try to put it together. So as you look at that set of puzzle pieces there, I'm wondering if anyone could just write a note in the chat about just looking at it like that, if that's what you saw on the table in front of you. Is there anything you immediately notice that might make it easier or harder to complete this puzzle? Is there anything that strikes you that some are upside down? Yeah, so you can't really see colors or patterns. Okay, anything else that might strike you about what might be challenging or easy? No reference photos. So thank you, Emma, for that note. It's not organized by edge pieces or middle pieces. Yeah, but you can look for them. And so that's a good point, that is one of the benefits. But I do want to come back to Emma's point about no photo. Usually we have the box, right? It's laid out in a pile, so it's not easy to even know where to start. You guys are giving great answers, all of which are really relevant to what we're discussing here. And the lack of the picture means you don't see the big picture. You don't know what the whole is supposed to be. So it becomes very easy to kind of zoom in on those little individual parts and then feel frustrated. You can't see how they fit together. You don't know where this is going. You don't know what it's trying to communicate. It can be very easy to kind of get frustrated when you don't get to see what I like to call the big picture. And that's often true not only in our response to our children, but in their capacity to get what they need from us. Life is like this big puzzle to them. Pieces are all just thrown, mismatched around. Some are upside down. They're in a pile. They're not organized. And there's no picture. There's no guiding picture to kind of say, oh, when it's organized, this is what it's going to look like. Or there was a picture of the family they were in before, if they remember it. And now that picture has been shattered and they don't know, is that the one I'm trying to put together? Or is this a new, different picture? And so it can get very challenging and frustrating very quickly. And though there are positives, like, Anik, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing your name right, but said that you're seeing a positive there. You're saying, okay, it's not easy to know how to start, but, if I spread it out more, if I make it not so much of a pile, I'm reading something positive into your comment there, right? So we can take a challenge and kind of turn it into a positive, but it's easy to just kind of run with the challenge, run with the negative. In fact, I don't know if you're aware of this, but there's brain science to that very point that says when we focus on negative things like gripes and complaints and stress and anxiety and fear and anger, when we focus on those, the brain pathways, the neural pathways that deal with that information get stronger. But we don't want strong negativity. We don't want the negativity in our brain to be stronger. But that's what happens when those things become our focus. And that's the same is true for our children. I don't know, when I lived in Vermont, we had what we called 5 seasons because we had spring and summer and fall and winter. And then we had this extra special season called mud season that came in between winter and spring fully being real. We lived on a dirt road in those days too. And if you lived on a dirt road during mud season, you know, one day it would be kind of warm and you'd drive in the mud and it would, your car would make trenches in the road. And then the next day it might have frozen again overnight. And when you go out there, the road is like, oh, those trenches are frozen in place, those ruts. And even if you try to avoid them with your car, it kind of like would pull you in. You ever had that experience where it just kind of pulls you in? And so that's what's happening in the brain. So for children, as they're trying to grapple with and deal with this mess of this pile of this puzzle without a picture, it's like they don't have language to really make sense of it. They have triggers from past trauma that kind of create barriers to making sense of it. Those triggers and that trauma is sending their brain into survival mode, and shutting down some of their capacities to weave through that and to notice, oh, maybe I could find the edge pieces. Maybe I could work on that. It's kind of shutting down some of that capacity. And so that's why a lot of it comes out in behavior. The things that have a purpose, they have a need, they need, maybe at the moment, maybe they're hungry, maybe they need comfort, maybe they don't feel safe and they need safety. Whatever it is, they're not able to express it for all these reasons, and it comes out in behavior. The good news is that there's room to prevent those triggers. There's room to learn coping skills to deal with those triggers. And then there's room to then grow and change and have different responses to those triggers. So we need to remember, though, that when the brain experiences those influences from the world, both positive and negative, that, oh, I want to say one thing back to my mud road, I kind of left it hanging there. The other thing is also true, that the more we can add positive relational connections, relationship, very important there, the more we add positive relational connections, they create the new pathways. They strengthen the new pathways in our brain that gives us the capacity to not slide into those old ruts and to have a new smooth, like a tarred road to follow, instead of the muddy one that gets us in the same pathways. So that's why we always want to think about, how can I best connect with this child in this moment? Because even, let me just go back to that other one for a moment, even if we're in the messiness of the puzzle with no picture and with in a messy pile and with half the pieces upside down, and we don't even know, frankly, from this picture if there might be missing pieces, right? Oh, a missing piece can really make you crazy, right, when you're trying to do a puzzle. Even if you don't know exactly what parenting technique should I be using right now, what word should I be saying right now? Even if you can't bring it to mind, or you're not sure you got it right, or if you ask yourself one question, how can I connect in a positive way? In spite of whatever else is going on, how can I do one thing that creates a positive connection? You will never be wrong. If you put that question first and foremost, even in the midst of chaos and storms and meltdowns, you will never be wrong. You'll never be making an unforgivable parenting mistake, even if you do some really bizarre thing. Next, if you're really focusing on how can I make a positive moment of connection, you know, somebody might say, no, you really shouldn't have given them that ice cream while they were having a temper tantrum. You reinforced the wrong message. No, don't worry about that. If the ice cream is what it took for you to have that positive connection, then you were not wrong to do it in that moment. So don't listen to the whole rest of the world. Just remember that. So if you don't remember anything else that I talk about, I hope that you will remember that. Now, all of these influences are experienced in every bit of who we are, in all of our being, in all of our life domains. So it's comes sensory, experiences, triggering experiences, confusing, anxiety producing, scary experiences, they usually come to us through our body, through our senses, or through some other body receptors that receives what's happening. So we experience it in our body first and foremost. Then it kind of works its way and it's processed in both our emotions and our cognition and our thoughts. And as that's happening, we're processing it. Our emotions are determining how we receive it in how we feel about it, how we perceive what's happening, if we perceive this as fair or not fair, or right or wrong, or safe or not safe. Those are perceptions that come to us through our emotions. But our brain has also got the cognitive part that's working, and we're processing our thoughts, and we sometimes have very astute and accurate and insightful thoughts, and sometimes we have thoughts that are just not helpful. And especially children, when their thoughts are based on previous experiences that didn't really line up well, they may have thoughts that are not helpful in these kind of moments. But all of that, what's happening in my body, what's happening in my emotions, what's happening in my thoughts, then influences what's happening, what comes out of us in our behavior. Now, I just want to check in and ask you a question. Who do you think, children or adults, when I say who, children or adults, who do you think is most likely to first process whatever's going on, good or bad, happy things as well as challenging things? Who first processes them in kind of in the order that I just described: body, emotions, then thoughts and behaviors? Who processes it that way? Children or adults or both? So we got a little bit of both going on. We've got every possible answer here now in the chat. Okay. Well, actually, we tend to think both. And so when we think both, what we're basically saying is we think children are kind of like small adults, and they're processing life the same way we are. That's why they're both kind of doing it this way. And it's not usually the case. It could be neither. That's possible, but there are some patterns that develop developmentally. See, there are some real developmental things happening in our brains, in our bodies, in our emotions, that everyone's pace is a little different. Of course, everyone has their own pace developmentally, but the sequence is pretty consistent. The sequencing of developmental stages is fairly consistent. So we don't have babies that learn to do things that teenagers would do before they even learn to crawl or something. Like, there's a sequencing of how brains and bodies and emotions develop. And so what happens is, while that development is occurring, children are very attuned to what they experience in their body, which then heavily influences how they perceive that through their emotions. And then it might even short circuit going through their cognition at all and just kind of coming out in terms of behavior. Or little by little, it starts going through cognitive processing. But it's definitely body, emotions, behavior, and cognition just way down kind of at the bottom of the list. By the time you've gone through enough developmental stages to become an adult, which I think most of us here tonight are, one way or another, whether we all own it or not. We are the complete opposite. It's like the pyramid is now inverted. It's upside down, or, opposite of what it was when we were small children. And now we tend, as adults, even if you're a very emotive, feeling kind of person, even if you're more in your brain kind of person, even if you're a more sensory, feel everything with your body person, no matter how you sort of think of yourself, adult development, generally things come at us and we process them with our brain, with our cognitive part of our brain. And as we kind of analyze it and process it and think about it, then the emotions and the body responses are happening, and then the behaviors occur. So we tend to think, without really thinking, we tend to kind of have this natural assumption that that's going to be true for children as well, which is why a lot of times you hear I don't know, maybe you've said these words. Maybe if you haven't said them, you've at least heard them said. This is why we often say or think when a child does something really confusing or challenging to us in terms of their behavior, we might say or think, what were you thinking? Have you ever heard that or thought that? What are you thinking? What were you thinking? Why did you do that? Right? Well, notice the focus on thinking. When we see a child or experience a child doing a behavior that seems to not make sense to us, we want to know, what were they thinking? Well, the answer is they're not. So they can't answer it, really. So they're either going to kind of blurt something out just to answer you because they know adults expect answers, or they're going to shut down, or something's going to happen there, or they're going to say something that you're then going to interpret as a lie, and then we start dealing with, oh, you're lying. All kinds of things happen in that moment, but that question is probably the least helpful question we can ever ask, and yet it's often the immediate one that pops into our brain, because we are very brain-based, usually brain cognition-based. And so in understanding that those pyramids are kind of in different, from whether you go from body, emotions, cognition, or whether you go start with cognition as the big one and go down, they're inverted. The child's way of responding to the world and the adult's way are inverted. So that understanding that really helps a lot with understanding behaviors. Now, you already know, and this isn't a whole class about trauma, but just a couple quick reminders, that trauma does change the brain. This is a very simplified picture, but just a quick reminder, because the reason I like this is the yellow. Yellow is a good color, but it also reminds us of light, right? And so in the thinking brain, in the calm brain, in the brain that can process things reasonably and rationally, all that beautiful part of the brain that we think called the cortex is lit up like a light that's turned on. And when there's a threat, whether that threat is a new threat, a new possible trauma, a new survival problem, or whether the threat is a trigger from something previous, that thinking part of the brain literally shuts down. If you look at the second picture, it's not that the yellow has faded. It's not that it's dimmed. It's not that it's patchy here and there. It's that it's off, completely off. So when we're trying to either prevent or engage with a child who's having crisis type behavior, we have to remember that that part of their brain that can process anything we say that's problem solving related, whether it's a promise of a good thing, like, hey, if you stop that behavior, we can watch that TV show you've been waiting for, or whether it's a threat of a consequence, if you keep this up, you're going to have, no TV for a week. Either one of those are problem solving type of solutions that their brain is offline. Like, it's like when you try to do a Zoom and your internet isn't working, it's just not there. You're not going to get it. It's offline. So that's why we have to respond to that limbic brain, that survival brain. We have to respond in ways that form safety and connection, because anything else we try is just going, it would be like me trying to offer this Zoom class to people who have no internet. It just wouldn't really work. And we know that survival brain looks different for different people. So sometimes it looks like fight. And we're going to, in a couple slides ahead, we're going to actually look at how these look in behaviors when it comes to children, how these different survival brain styles appear when we talk about behavior. But the most common ones people often hear about, fight or flight, then the instinct, to kind of fight it out, to overcome, to conquer the problem, to flee from it, to get away from it. Freeze is also pretty commonly understood. In more recent years, there's more that have been uncovered and discovered and investigated by researchers. This might not even be a all-inclusive list, but this just gives you the idea that there's more. Flocking is kind of the way I put the picture of the birds here. And if any of you have teenage children, in particular middle school, 11, 12, 13-year-olds, especially, this is one of the ways that their survival brain very often works. Flocking, kind of, I just got to be with everybody, you know. And so if a fight breaks out on one side of the school play yard, what happens? Everyone is running over there, right? It's kind of a need to be with everybody. But adults, we do that too sometimes. I don't know if I'm going to date myself as being old here. I'm old enough to remember exactly where I was on September 11th of 2001, but I wasn't home, and I was with a group of people at an actual conference. And you know what everybody's instinct was? I want to get home. I want to be with my people, right? I want to get home. I want to be with my people. We wanted to flock. We wanted to be with our people. And that was the instinct. And related to that instinct was I got to check in with them and see if they're okay. Like, you know, they're in Iowa. None of the planes were in Iowa, but yet there was this idea that, you know, I got to find out if they're okay. So that's kind of what the flock one is. Flapping and frenzy is also a little bit what these birds in the picture are doing. And that's very common with children too. It's when their survival brain is just kind of going a little bit haywire and it hasn't kicked in, it hasn't locked in to fight or to flee or to freeze. It's kind of just processing. And so you get a lot of unfocused behavior. And then fawning is a more recently understood one, but it has to do with the survival instinct. Now remember, all of these are survival. They're not cognitively thought out. They're not intentional in any way. They're just the immediate survival mechanism that our brain shoots us into when we're dealing with a difficult situation. And fawn is when the survival brain says, you know, your best way of staying alive in this moment is to please who's ever trying to harm you, is to do what they want. We often hear about this when there's sexual assault, and someone later, the victim later, is questioned about, why didn't you fight back? Why didn't you run away? Why didn't you scream? You know, why did you give in? You must have wanted it. All these kinds of things that are said, but it's usually because their brain has literally generated the response of saying, just get through this alive, right? And so that's kind of where that one comes from. And like I said, I'm going to, in a few minutes, take us to a slide that demonstrates what these things look like in terms of behavior. You may have learned about the window of tolerance. I want you to kind of focus on that yellow box in the middle. The word tolerance, when it comes to this idea of having a window of tolerance, is what level of discomfort can I tolerate, can I handle without getting into my survival responses? So I like to picture like an actual window. So the yellow part there is the opening of the window, and the pink on the top and the blue on the bottom are kind of the part that you can raise or lower if you're opening or closing a window, right? And so if a window is really tightly closed, air doesn't get through, light doesn't get through, nothing gets through. But if it's too open, too much gets through, right? So there has to be some boundaries around it. And what we need to be able to do on the prevention side, as well as on the post-storm side of what goes on with our children, is help them be able to widen their window of tolerance so they can tolerate a little bit of discomfort at a time without flipping. And you've heard, you know, Dan Siegel or others talk about flipping your lid. And so without flipping into the survival place, can they tolerate a little bit of disappointment? Can they tolerate a little bit of frustration without flipping into those states? So we want to help them. So we don't help them by making it so that they never experience any disappointment or frustration or anxiety. On the other hand, we don't want to flood them with too much of those experiences. A, because then they won't feel safe with us, and B, because then that immediately takes them out of their window. So it's a very careful dance of just trying to gently help them. And the way we do that, the way people widen their window of tolerance, again, the word you're going to hear a lot from me tonight, connection. It's when they can accept and believe and realize that they have at least one safe person that they can turn to. Now, as you see in the little orange box on the side, mindfulness, being present, grounding, being able to do some breathing and self-soothing techniques. All of those things really, truly do help. And those are techniques. So if you're keeping track and trying to figure out what are your 3 techniques that from the learning objectives, these are some to help children learn. Children who have a lot of behavior challenges, the more they can learn some of these strategies, the more successful they will be in widening their window of tolerance. But the number one thing is that they have the capacity to believe that they have a safe person, they have a connection to someone that is safe, that will help them to stay in that place. And then Dr. Porges, who first talked about the window of tolerance, wanted to remind us in more recent times, some of his more recent work, that getting in those excited states or getting in a very relaxed state, they're not necessarily always negative, right? So sometimes people look at this picture and think, oh, I don't want to be in this hyper state because I don't want to see a child get really excited or something because that means they're in this hyper state, or I don't want to see them be so like calm and sleepy and whatever, that means they're in a hypo state, and those are bad things. No, they're not always bad. This picture that he more recently came out with, I really like because it shows sort of some of the interaction. And you know what? Sometimes when we're in the intersections of those places, it's for a good reason. Like if you're kind of energized and you're joyful and you're able to play or dance or do some of the things that he identifies there, that's a good thing. We don't want to close the window so tightly that children can't experience a full range of what it means to be alive, right? So don't be afraid if you have children that like to get excited. Maybe their excitement sometimes gets them in trouble, but you don't want to squash their capacity for joy or excitement as you try to channel some of that energy. Same thing with the calm and quiet side. Yes, getting into that hypo aroused state, shutting down, freezing, that's not good. We don't want that happening. But on the other hand, children who can learn to be happy and in a calm state, who can learn to self-soothe, who can learn to just value some quiet moments, hey, that's a good thing. So we have to remember that not all of the spaces outside of that, so-called window are bad. We have to sort of mitigate and have balance with it. So take your child's sort of natural propensities and try to help them learn positive activities that go along with that. So if it is a child that's really exuberant and maybe aggressive and kind of getting into trouble with behaviors that are like that, think about how can I channel some of that kind of energy into positive things. Maybe this is a child that really needs a very active self-defense or martial arts or dance or sports program, horseback riding, something really where they're mastering something big. If it's a child that really goes into that hypo aroused state, maybe I can help them learn how to value quiet and do something maybe like a puzzle with all the right pieces in place, but something that can help them feel comfortable in those quiet spaces. So take their natural propensities and try to help them develop those in positive ways. But the best news related to all of what I've covered so far is that wherever their brain is at, it's not finished. It's not fully finished. It never is. Not even my old brain is fully finished yet. So there certainly aren't. And I found this little clip art picture years ago, and I just love it for this purpose because it literally shows a brain being constructed, scaffolding and construction going on. That's what's happening. And that's why when I talked about those ruts of the negativity, but also building the new pathways of the positivity and the connection, that's what's going on. Pathways are being built continuously. The other thing I like here is the image of scaffolding, because that's our role as the adults in the child's life, as the caregivers especially, but if you work with, if you engage with your child's teachers, coaches, babysitters, therapists, any other adults in their life, grandparents, all of the adults in the child's life, we're kind of like the workers here and the scaffolding. And if you've ever watched a building be built in your community, or a road for that matter, anything that has some degree of scaffolding involved, when is the scaffolding built? How and when is the scaffolding itself built in context with when the actual building is built? Does anyone have a thought about that? How and when is the scaffolding built vis-a-vis the actual building being built? So we've got a couple of people saying before. I want you to really visualize that. Think about it. So do we build up all the scaffolding? We're building a 10-story building. We build 10 stories of scaffolding, and then somehow we have to get under it to build the building. So we've got during, we've got when required, we've got at the same time, step by step. Yes, that now the before answers were not bad answers, because that's what we would imagine, right? Of course you need that those structures in place to protect it as you grow. But then when you really try to visualize it, you realize, oh no, it's gotta be during and moving and flexible and kind of in a continuum of how it happens. And that's how it is to be a caregiver to our children, right? We're the scaffolding, but we've got to grow with them. We can't put all the structures and all the boundaries and all the rules and all the parenting techniques in place and then say, okay, little child, grow right in the middle of that. We have to do it with them. And safely, as the last comment just said. Yes, absolutely. So picture yourself that way. I'm the scaffolding, or I'm part of the scaffolding. How am I getting ahead? Am I kind of pursuing too fast? Am I getting ahead of this child's growth? Am I too far behind? Like, have I not built enough scaffolding for where they are now, and they're getting wobbly and unsafe because I haven't kind of put the right scaffolding in place? So picture yourself in that role. We know some of the situations, right? And sensory experiences that can cause a trigger in ourselves. We have to know our own as well as the child's. You have these available as a handout. So some of these that have a lot of words, they're more for the supplemental reason of being something you can look back on. But there's a lot of different things that can cause that triggering experience that leads to that chaotic crisis-driven behavior. Now, here's where I said we were going to come back to those survival behaviors or responses and see how they look in terms of behavior. Let me just take a sip here. So you see the fight response in terms of a child's brain going into fight can look like fighting, but it can also look like talking back. It can look like the things that we tend to call disrespect or rudeness. That can be a fight response coming out. Flight can look like running away, literally trying to get away from the situation, but it can also look like stealing or lying. Anyone have a thought about why stealing, or how or why stealing or lying can be put in the possibly in the flight category? Well, it certainly feels like it's kind of for attention. And that's not an unreasonable thing to think, Carrie. So thanks for sharing that. And Taylor added using it as an escape. So I agree with you on that, except I would kind of phrase it slightly differently and not saying using it. The only reason is because that sounds like there's intentionality there. And often when it's a survival response, it's without intention. The brain is not stopping, thinking about it, cognitively deciding, I'm going to do this to deceive you, to escape the situation. It's a lot more fluid than that. And it's just, this is how I survive. This is how I get through this moment without that intentionality. But you're right. It's a way of escaping. It's a way of getting away, even if I physically can't run away. So you can see, and as you go down the list, some of the different ways that these survival, yes, and then fleeing shame, absolutely. So you can see how some of these different survival responses actually play out in behavior. Now, that doesn't mean every time a child does one of these behaviors. It's a survival response, but it means as you get to become more fluent in your child's behavior language, you will start to notice these things. So we're going to move into looking at the preventing the storm, and I want to highlight 4 ways to think about prevention. Recognize the signs that are going on with your child. Recognize what's leading when they're possibly likely to get into that crisis stage. Settling their body. Remember when I went over the inverted triangles, they're experiencing things through their body more so than any other part of their being. So if we can help them settle their body, that reduces a lot of the other stuff. Nurture attachment, in other words, forge connection, positive, secure connection, and then help with regulating emotions. So we'll kind of take those apart a little bit by bit. And the first part is knowing the warning signs of your child. Now, this meme also really dates my age, but I don't know if any of you have seen reruns of Lost in Space, which was a TV show of my own childhood. But Lost in Space was about this family that was traveling around space, and their son, who was maybe 10 or 11, I don't remember exactly, his name was Will Robinson. And whenever they landed on a new planet and kind of set the spaceship down, he'd try to go exploring. Well, luckily for this family, they had a robot. And the robot's job when they landed was to follow Will around and make sure he was safe. And whenever Will was about to do something that wasn't going to be safe, the robot would start, the arms would go like this, the lights would flash, and the robot would say, "Danger, danger, Will Robinson." And that would alert Will to stop, but it would also draw the parents to come over. Well, our kids don't come with robots that give us those kind of cues. So we have to kind of learn how to recognize the signs that they do give us. And I would suggest that you want to make for yourself something along the lines of a chart like this, where you have 3 buckets and you say verbal. What are the verbal? I'm not talking about what they do when they're in full meltdown mode. I'm saying, what are the verbal cues? What are the things that verbally come out of them in those moments leading up to a possible crisis? Maybe they say, certain words, maybe they say them in a certain way, maybe they shut down and don't talk at all. Whatever, what are their verbal cues? Pay attention, learn what those are. Same thing with behavioral. What things do you start seeing them do? And I'm going to show a couple of examples in a minute, but what are some of the things, this child in the picture that I selected here is kind of pulling his hair. Maybe you have a child that starts pulling at their hair before they're going to kind of fall into a meltdown mode. If you start noticing these things, you're much more equipped to handle them. Carrie's mentioned screaming, right? So that's both kind of a little bit verbal and behavioral, right? We've got the situational. I put a picture of a birthday party here because I have one particular daughter who, if it was anybody's birthday, including hers, but especially when it wasn't hers, but if it was anybody's birthday, you knew there was going to be a meltdown on the horizon. She just couldn't cope with the circumstances surrounding birthday parties. And so we had to plan ahead for that if we didn't want everyone to be caught up in the vortex of her storm, right? So just making yourself a chart like this and kind of talking it over with your co-parenting partner and figuring out, what do I notice? What do I see? What precedes the things that are most challenging with our child? And know them well enough that you can also communicate them with others. Once I was asked to consult about a child that I'm going to call Jay here, who had been just kicked out of school after school after school. He had so many placements because every time he got kicked out of a school, he was also being placed in a different foster family because each school was in a different district. And this was a little boy. I mean, he wasn't even a teenager yet. He was a little kid, and he kept getting kicked out of school, expelled, then moved to a different placement again and again and again. And every adult involved with him would say things like, and the reason he kept getting kicked out, on paper, the actual reason was he would get into fights, fist fights, and hurt other children. But the words that preceded that were so interesting because they would always say, he would burst into a fight for no apparent reason. Everything could be going fine, and then suddenly he would be attacking another child. So there's no reason for it. We can't see a reason, so that's why we can't work with it. We can't do anything about it. Luckily, the school he was in at the time that I was asked to consult made an agreement with me that they would, no matter what happened in the next 2 weeks, they wouldn't eject him from the school. So they would give us at least 2 weeks to try to see if we could figure some things out. Well, it turned out that it wasn't always for no apparent reason, but it was a little bit of a puzzle to figure out. But the first thing we quickly were able to figure out is that most of his moments when he would jump up and try to, beat on somebody happened in the school cafeteria. So we knew there was something going on about lunchtime in the cafeteria. So we talked among the team that was working of different ways. They said, well, maybe we'll have him eat lunch in the classroom and not in the cafeteria, but that's very isolating. And, so each pro had a con. Then it happened where we finally got to observe the moment before the storm, a tray, a cafeteria tray somewhere else in the classroom, not his, not near him, dropped on the floor. Anyone ever been in a school cafeteria when a tray drops on the floor? What does it sound like? Well, I'll tell you what it sounded like to Jay. It sounded like gunshot. Because it was so loud and so sudden. And it turned out that part of his history was he had been living in a house. This is in Philadelphia. Had been living in Philly, have what we call row houses that are attached to each other. Had been living in a row house where a shooting had occurred in the house next door and a child had been killed. And that wasn't even the reason he was in care. And so it was kind of a footnote or something people hadn't really zoomed in on in terms of understanding this child and his history and his trauma. But whenever he heard those trays dropping, he was immediately going into survival mode, and his survival mode was fight, and he was just coming up swinging at whoever was near him. So once we had some information to go on, then we could start to put in place some plans to help him have some better seating in the cafeteria so he could see what was going on better, to have him have a support person that was near him that if he did get scared, he could turn to. And and he was able to give some input into the plans as well. And that's when he didn't have to keep, being expelled from schools, and all his behaviors didn't clear up instantly or anything like that. But we started to have enough information to make plans. And that's why it's good to know the things about your child. So here's another tool that you can use, and you can print this out when you have the slides. Just kind of think about, what are the things from my child's backstory that might possibly contribute to some of the times when they have the most challenging behaviors. But also, what strengths do they bring with them from their backstory? That was a strength for Jay, that he was able to respond in a way that could potentially have protected himself and others, right? That's, even though it was getting him thrown out of school, it actually had a strength component to it too. So you want to look at both pieces. Then understand how that plays out. How do you see those triggers playing out around him? And how do you see his responses? And the more you can kind of organize what you know about your child, then the more you can both plan for and respond to the more crisis-driven things that happen. So before we go to the next slide, let's do poll number 2. Okay, and this one says, one way to prevent meltdowns is to be aware of signs a child may exhibit before the storm hits, such as, this is not a single choice one. You can choose as many of these as you think might be relevant. So whichever ones of these are behaviors that some children exhibit before their crisis storm hits. Perseverating, which means repeating certain thoughts or actions. Spacing out or looking like they're spaced out, disconnected. Getting some kind of certain look on their face that you recognize. Acting happier than usual. Somatic issues, complaining of physical issues such as headache or dizziness. So choose as many of those as you think might be signs that a child is approaching crisis mode. All right, let's go ahead and close it now and share the results. And I love this because all answers were selected by good numbers of you, and you would be right. So let's close that out real quick so I can show the slide that goes with this. So all of these things are very frequently those early warning signs, like the Doppler radar or whatever they call it on your weather station that you might happen to watch. These are the signs that a storm is coming. If you get repeated thoughts or statements, restless, fidgety movements, lots of somatic issues, stomach aches, headaches, fainting spells, that sort of spacing out, not being present, not really being there. Boy, one of our sons, that was absolutely the tell. You know, he'd suddenly seem like he just wasn't there at all. Or there might be a certain kind of look. For some, it's an angry look. For some, it's a scared look. For some, it's a very kind of shut down type of look. And I didn't add on this in these bullets, but back on the poll I did, or seeming happier than usual. And lots of times when children do self-harm, when they even have suicide ideation, or when they do really challenging behaviors, people are especially caught off guard because they say they seemed so happy, they seemed so good. It's like that, you know, finally some pressure was being released, and then that's when the difficult behavior kicked in. So if you can recognize these symptoms and then do what I'm referring to as halt and distract. Well, what does halt and distract mean? Halt means, can you identify, besides those type of behaviors that I just highlighted, can you identify some of the antecedents that come before meltdown behavior? And sometimes it happens when children are hungry or thirsty. You can put both there. So HALT, halt. If you want to halt the crisis behavior, sometimes figuring out if they maybe need a snack or a drink. There is a real, those Snickers commercials are real. There is a real thing. And it especially affects our kiddos more than maybe the general population. If they're angry about something. So if we can sort of figure out what they're angry about and help them try to work through it, which a couple of points on the next slide will address. Lonely affect our children often feel like they don't fit in, they don't belong, nobody understands them. I've got nobody. One of the very first children in foster care I ever met in my life before I even became a foster parent, she was in a hospital situation, and the nurse was asking her, "Who can I call for you?" And she said, "There's nobody you can call for me. I grew up in foster care and I ain't got nobody." That's just how that loneliness is so like in your bones. And so sometimes just having comfort, having connection, having social engagement can be the thing that heads off the crisis. And then tiredness and exhaustion. And you know, tiredness with children doesn't always look the same as it does with adults. They don't always yawn. They don't always look sleepy. They don't always put their head down. You know, some kids do that, but sometimes they get more hyper. The more tired they are, the more overstimulated they are and exhausted, they can get more expressive and hyper. So try to see if one of these things is a typical antecedent, and then you can begin to address the specific thing. The other thing, which I said would distract, is actually what we call the 4Ds. These are not only understood as helpful with addressing behavior related to trauma or other anxiety, but also can be, also this terminology is used in the addiction field, because often people who deal with addictions and are getting cravings for whatever they're addicted to, these 4Ds sometimes help them avoid their craving. So it's a very powerful set of tools here. So the first is distract. And I talked about our son who he would get that shutdown look. Like if we noticed it in time, we could distract, we could, instead of kind of things unrolling, we could just change up what's ever going on. Hey, let's go out and throw the frisbee. Let's, you know, let's get a snack together. If we could just change the dynamic of what was happening, we could distract him from whatever was creating this impending storm long enough so then we could put other pieces in place. De-stress, meaning learn some de-stressing techniques. Some of that is going to come in the next couple of slides. Delay rather than deny. If it's a time when a child is going to probably have a crisis or a meltdown because they're not able to get something that they want or have something they want or do something they want, rather than just being really, no, you can't do that. Saying, I understand that you'd like to do that, and let's think about when you can. Let's plan a time. Let's do this first and then that. And if you can delay rather than deny, sometimes you can avoid those crises. And then decatastrophizing, this especially relates to the addiction issue that I talked about, but it also relates to other things. And that's a lot of times when our head starts to get into survival mode. I mean, what survival mode is really telling you is, I will die. I will die if whatever's happening continues. That tray that dropped in the cafeteria or whatever else, I'm going to die next if I don't jump up and start fighting, or if I don't run away, or if I don't, get into this meltdown behavior. And so if we see it early enough, we can't do this in the midst of it, but if we catch it early enough, we can say, it seems like this is really distressing you right now. I wonder, what do you think could happen here? And let's try to understand that, if you don't get to watch that show tonight that you wanted to watch, I wonder when we could watch it. Or I wonder, is it possible that we could do something else that would be just as much fun for tonight and do that another time? Or help them see that literally, one of my husband's phrases, the world's not going to come to an end. Help them literally see the world is not going to end and they're not going to die. And life is going to go on, even if this thing that's looming happens or doesn't happen. So those are the 4 Ds. You've got the HALT and you've got the 4 Ds. And as you're thinking about that, imagine, as they're approaching that crisis moment, put yourself in a situation, if you've ever been in this situation, where you've had to walk down a street that's very dark in a place you've never been before. Oh, Jessica, I see what you just wrote about where do you feel this in your body, and you are so right on, because that's the very next slide you're going to see. So we are in the same wavelength here. So imagine you're walking down a dark street and you don't feel safe. If another person comes up to you at that time and says, oh, you look stressed out, you look like you're scared here, I just want to reassure you, and they put their hand on your body, they touch you, put their arm on you, it's a safe street. That's probably not going to make you feel more safe. You're feeling every bit of that uncertainty in your body, and your body is going to freak if someone you don't know comes along and tells you you're safe. Same thing with our kids. We can't say calm down, or it's okay, or you're going to be fine. We've got to engage these other strategies, because it's their body, first of all, and then it's their survival response that's kicking in, not logic. So yes, right where Jessica was leading us, we want to help them understand how they're experiencing what's going on in their body. So remember, we're in the prevention part here. So we want to help them know how to listen to their body, help them pay attention to signals they get in their body. If their hands start forming into fists, or if they feel tight somewhere, or something hurts, or something's comfortable, help them learn how to connect to their own body. And then you can also help them learn how to soothe and settle their body. So let's do the third poll. So part of noticing their responses is also using their body to help get through hard things. And so this question is about both of those: noticing body responses and moving one's body in times of trauma, trauma triggers, or stress. This time I only want you to choose one answer. It helps get your mind off the stress or trauma. It's dangerous because you could get hurt if you're preoccupied. It helps reduce and relieve stress and promotes healing. It increases the likelihood that you'll escalate your behaviors. So helps reduce and relieve stress and promotes healing. And that's exactly right. That's why we want to notice our body responses and use our body, move our body, settle our body, soothe our body, when we're especially in the pre-crisis or post-crisis mode. getting hurt. We have to be careful how we teach children to use their bodies because we don't want them to get hurt. And there always is that possibility when we introduce sort of physical reactions. But if we engage them in physical activities that are safe, then even if they are preoccupied with their other stuff, they're less likely to get hurt. So great. Let's go on from there. Shut down the poll. So helping children recognize where do feelings sit in their body, and you can do that in a playful way. You can play around, you can do charades, you can do role plays, you can do puppet play, you can do just sort of acting something out. Pick certain types of body responses and say, what is this telling you when your body, when your fists get clenched or when you start giggling? Or what about when you have a certain emotion? How does your body respond? If you're excited, what does your body do? If you're really mad, what does your body do? So just being playful, doing it depending on the age and developmental stage and interest of your child, kind of doing it in different ways. You can do it with dolls, you can do it creatively, you can do it with music, to help them just recognize how their body expresses different emotions, different needs. And then you especially want to teach them ways that they can soothe and settle their body before a crisis hits or after they've kind of calmed down from a difficult time, get their body back online and resettled. Many of these activities are credited to Somatic, the author of My Grandmother's Hands, which is an amazing book about trauma and generational trauma particularly, but he has a lot of somatic exercises woven in with it. So things you can teach children to do, all those things you can do by yourself, things you can just learn as your own internal coping mechanisms. So you can get kind of all three of your strategies off this list if you want. But so there's many that you can do by yourself, and then there's others that you can do with others and that you as a caregiver can lead children in if you have safety in place and if you have trust in place. So doing some of these body settling things in a group requires safety and trust as a prerequisite. But when you have that, then doing some of these things collectively gives an even greater positive result when you can do it collectively. So I'm going to just give you a moment to look over the list and see, is there anything you don't get, you don't understand, doesn't make sense to you, or that you'd like to make a comment about or share an experience with? All right, great. It all makes sense. Never would have thought of lotioning hands. Okay, yeah, and lotioning hands really very effective. I have a young lady that I coach on a regular basis that has a tremendous trauma history, and we always start every session with self. She does her own, I do my own, lotioning our hands, and it just really, really sets a very calming tone. Carrying, right? If it's a small enough child, or if you have a relationship even with a bigger child, where you can do that. Rocking is on here, yep. And rocking, anything that invokes the rocking movement, whether it's having a rocking chair, whether it's a swing, whether it's any kind of other activity like swimming or something that requires that kind of motion, some kinds of dance. Walking the dog, I love that one, Tracy. Yeah, great example of body in motion. Yeah, and sometimes you can do things. You can do things that sort of seem spontaneous, but you have a plan for it. I'll show you that in just a second. But first, I wanted to give you these three questions too. These are things you can help children identify what makes their body feel strong and safe, as well as calm. And if they can identify their own activities and kind of have a poster or a checklist or something visually available for them that says, hey, when I'm feeling, anxious or less safe, or if I'm feeling, fearful and not calm, or if I'm feeling, that I need to be stronger or braver about something, what are the activities that I can do with my body that make me feel that way? And There can be, again, anything from dance to sports to climbing a tree to walking the dog. I love that example. Sitting in the rocking chair, rocking, any of the things, but help them identify their own as well as some that you help them with. And this is the one where I was saying you can come up with something that sort of feels spontaneous. You can find these all over the internet. They're called 1-minute dance parties. This is just an example. I'm just going to show you a few seconds of it.
Hit, hit, butt, shake, and jump, okay? All right, so for now, I'm saying jump, okay? Your jump may not be a jump, but let's see some of my seated people do their jump. Let's see. Yeah, all right, Nick. Oh my God, look at Mark. Mark is like hopping in his chair.
When I dance, they call me Macarena, and the boys, they say que soy buena. They all want me, they can't have me, so they all come and dance beside me.
So the reason I shared that is that you can literally create your own if you want, but you can literally find these things that it's like a minute, and you can change the dynamic. You can do prevention if you say, hey, I think we all need to dance a little bit. We all need some music. Let's dance for 1 minute before we do that chore that nobody wants to do, or in the middle of homework. Homework is getting us really stressed. Let's have a dance party for 1 minute, and then we can get back to it. And you can, like I said, just put on any music, make something up, or you can find these kind that already exist. But the reason I like to show this one is that it shows people of diverse ages, backgrounds, genders, abilities, disabilities. So it's not something that's limited to people who have certain physical attributes or strengths. And so we're going to sort of switch gears here into building attachment or strengthening attachment. But before we do that, I've covered a lot of territory so far. So any questions anyone has, any reflections on everything we've covered so far before we move into this next portion?
I'm still just floored by the diagram, the pyramids that you pointed out about how adults and children, it's just absolutely so true how we process and how we learn information, and it just is blowing my mind to never have thought about it in that exact way. It's going to be one of those things that I carry with me forever.
Yeah, I know. The first time I saw it, and I think the first time I saw it, someone drew on a board the two pyramids, and yeah, it really said, oh, of course they're not going to respond favorably when I try to do it all on the cognitive level, just because that's where I am.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it probably also shapes how they develop their cognition too, because all of those things are so connected that, they believe things are scary because they felt them as being scary. So yeah. Just amazing. Thank you.
Yeah. Great. Well, love it when that happens. So thank you for sharing that. And Beth, thank you for chiming in. I am going to go about 10 to 15 more minutes and then pause for the remaining questions in the unrecorded portion. And the good thing about this being a 2-part series, which I front load, I put a lot in the first one. If we don't get all to it, we pick up from that in the second one and go on. So don't worry, you won't miss anything if you come to part 2. So even if you get the PDF later and say, wait a minute, she didn't do these last 10 slides, no worries, we'll get to them next time. I like to make sure we really engage with the material rather than just rushing through it. But the next piece of preventing crisis is really nurturing attachment, because the stronger, the more secure, the safer, the more trust-based that the attachment is that a child has with their primary caregiving adult, then the safer they feel in situations that are stressful and distressful, and the more they're going to have that window of tolerance that we talked about earlier. So first thing I want to think about is, how do you recognize attachment? So I'm going to show you this little clip of like 10-second video, and I want you to just notice, what do you see here that shows you that there is or isn't attachment going on, and who do you think is who in this little scenario? All right. So did anything happen there that made you feel that there's a, well, who do you think the players are in this? Who do you think these people are here in relation to each other? And then did you see anything that made you think there's some attachment happening? So the person in the red shirt, you thought maybe is a big sister. You thought mom is holding the baby. Someone else said, are they siblings? Well, I used this particular video with the full permission of the people involved, and they are people I'm still continuing to be involved with to this day. They live in Kenya, and I go there every year. And the little baby boy in that picture is now a 7-year-old. And mom is actually the young lady in the red shirt. She's the mom, and she had this baby when she was only 13. And she had, the pregnancy was resulted from a highly traumatic experience, as you can probably imagine. And she absolutely was shut down. She was so traumatized. She wanted nothing to do with this baby that had been born to her. You would think there was zero attachment, zero chance of attachment. She wouldn't even look at the baby when he was first born. And now you see all the telltale signs of attachment. You see eye contact, you see joy, you see physical engagement, you see appropriate touch. You see, if it had continued towards the end, you started to see her look to the other side. Someone called her over and she got up, walked away. If it continued, see distress of the baby when she left, that he didn't want her to leave. Those are all telltale signs of attachment. And the reason I use this particular scenario is because even circumstances that are so highly traumatizing that it seems like attachment is impossible, attachment can be nurtured, it can be built, it can be strengthened. And if anything ever seemed impossible, it was for sure this scenario. And yet that attachment, even this baby here in this picture, I think at this point in time was about 6 or 7 months old. And now at 7 years old, you know, I can tell you for sure there's a really secure, trust-based, safety-based attachment between them, when there absolutely was not during the pregnancy or immediately after. So attachment can be built, and those are some of the signs of how you recognize it. Joy, eye contact, loving touch, physical connection, distress at separation. All of those are good signs of attachment. And when we work to build secure attachment, what we know is that children who have the more secure attachments, that in itself is predictive of having coping skills that help them get through stress, high periods of stress, high periods of anxiety, and fear, and all the other triggering things that can lead to the behavior. So building attachment is a way to prevent the storms that we talk about. So without doing a whole course on attachment, we're going to just give a quick little example of some of the ways to build attachment, and I refer to them as the 6 E's. The more you can have face-to-face interaction, and some children, because of their trauma, really resist that. So you don't want to force it, but you want to try to playfully work it in, which they were doing in that video, right? They were having playful, and she was sticking her tongue out at them and stuff. You can do that with a baby, but with older kids too, you can do things that kind of quickly give you some of that face-to-face time. Face-to-face interaction increase attachment. Eating together, sharing food is a highly attachment-related activity. And so feeding a child, letting them help choose the foods, prepare the foods, being playful with food, like tossing a piece of cereal and seeing who can catch it in their mouth or something. Anything that you can do to make food time relational and pleasant. Safe touch. And for children that have been harmed through touch, we often resist in the opposite direction of, being wary of touch, but every child needs touch. So we have to figure out what feels safe to that child. And you may have to start slow, but safe touch builds attachment. Empathy and comfort. Too often adults brush off children's concerns because they seem minor to us. You'll get over it. That's not that big of a deal. You're not even bleeding. No, you don't need a Band-Aid. You know, all of those things, rather than, oh yeah, that hurts. And I can see how a Band-Aid might make that feel a lot better. Let's go get one. You know, even if there's no blood, no scratch, no nothing. So just giving that kind of empathy and comfort, finding things to do that you enjoy doing together. The more you build in sort of your front loading the relationship with enjoyment, so that again, you reduce the storm type of situations. And then equipping the child with affect, especially affect regulation skills, when you model them yourself and when you teach them through, again, playful game playing. I was telling my therapist that we connect better when I speak slowly and softly and exaggerate facial expressions. Yeah, I love that. So that's a perfect, beautiful description there, Tracy. Thank you for sharing it. That you find that little niche, you find that thing that kind of increases connection, and then run with it, do it. Playing charades and games like charades is going to come up on a slide or two in a minute, because it's such a great way to kind of have a playful way to do some of these things. Helping children unpack those big feelings. And one way you can do it is to use something called SOS, which stands for, I'll tell you what it stands for in a minute, but before I tell you what it stands for, I want to say that it's kind of like teaching children what to do when there's a fire. You know, little preschoolers and kindergartners get told if you're around a fire or if your clothes catch on fire, stop, drop, and roll, stop, drop, and roll. And they learn that, and they can recite it, and they can repeat it, and they can demonstrate it, they can role play it, they can giggle about it. But you kind of do it so repetitively that then if they really were on fire, it would come naturally. It would be muscle memory. So SOS is one of those kind of tools. And so it stands for slow down, orient, and get safety. So slowness, orientation, and safety. Slow, orient, safe. You might think orient is not a word that children use, but once you teach them it, then they can get it. So slowing down means we need to slow our brain down and help children understand, yeah, when we get anxious, it's like our brain is going really fast and it doesn't give us time to do what we probably want to do or should do. How do we slow our brain down? The best way that we slow our brain down is by breathing really slow. So let's figure out some ways we can breathe together. We can blow bubbles, or we can, pretend we're blowing the little seeds off a dandelion, or blowing out a candle. You can find a bazillion of these things online. You probably know a bunch of them already, but helping them remind themselves, slow my brain down by breathing slowly. Oh, orient means, where am I right now? That's what orient means. So you want to give them little tricks they can do to remind their brain, even when they're feeling anxious, that I'm okay right now. I'm not in the, see, the thing that trauma triggers do, it rewinds the brain to say, oh, you're in that place where you weren't safe and where bad things happen. So orient says, no, I'm going to remind my brain I'm okay right now. So you could say the O stands for okay, if that's easier than the word orient. But it's so, teach them a little thing they can do, like you can clap your hands. That kind of refreshes your brain and wakes you up and says, oh, I'm here. You can look around with your eyes. You can listen with your ears. You can, use the senses to say, where am I right now? If you wear a bracelet, you can kind of snap it against your wrist. So there's lots of things you can do that kind of quick snap your brain into orienting to where is the here and now. And that takes a lot of the fear away. And then safe means put into practice my safety plan, which we're probably going to end up doing next time, getting more into safety plans. But who's my safe person? Where's my safe place? What's my safe word? What's my safe thing I can do? So we teach children some of these things. And again, part of it depends on age. But you can teach them when they start to feel the little bits of things that get them in trouble, or that get them feeling out of control, or feeling like overwhelmed. When they start to have the beginnings of those feelings, can they do SOS? Can they slow, orient, and look for safety? And then as they're learning to regulate their emotions, the more you can do it through fun, playful ways, the more it will stick. So I've mentioned that charades are great. You can play emotions, feelings charades, and so you just write a word about a feeling, proud, angry, bored, happy, silly, whatever, guilty, shame. So mix in some of the hard ones with some of the sillier fun ones. And then people can play charades having to act out the feeling without using words. And that helps with a lot of affect recognition as well as affect regulation. That headbands game that I have pictured there also can be used in that same way. Another way with older children is actually using TV or video where you actually look at either a commercial even or a music video or part of a TV show that you're actually watching, and watch a clip, 30 seconds, 2 minutes, whatever, not too long, but where characters are interacting, but watch it with no sound. Just turn all the sound and don't put, what do you call this? Closed captions, don't put captions on it. Just watch it with no sound. So you're taking away some of the sensory input and you're just watching how the characters are interacting. And then you pause it and you say, what did we see? How do you think that person felt by what you saw? And the more that you can get better at being able to put words to emotions, to understand how other people are feeling, to be able to have empathy, to have people have empathy for you, to build a rich emotional vocabulary, really helps reduce the crises and the storm. So we are getting to the time we usually would want to stop for questions. We have a little bit left that I had planned for tonight, but not a ton. We're doing pretty good. So I think we will have some good place to build from starting next time. We'll talk about responding in the moment and then the importance of what we do after the storm. And when we do the responding in the moment, we certainly will talk about the big topic that is scheduled anyway for next time, which is not next week, but next time, which is the de-escalating. So I think I didn't give you a full half hour, but I'm giving you about 15 minutes where we can turn off the recording, where I can take the slides down and we can have any additional discussion, reflections, questions, etc. So does that sound good, Carolyn?
Sounds wonderful.
All right.
Thank you so much.
I'll take that down. So yeah, when you get your PDF, you'll see about 7 or 8, more like maybe 10 slides that I didn't finish, but don't worry, we'll do them next time. So come back on the 28th.